Part 79. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 782. Zhao Yuan came to Tang's house in the morning to complain to Tang Ning, saying that he was already studying Ziji Tongjian. Each volume of the book was more than an inch thick, and there were 30 volumes in total. It would take him 5 years to finish it. This is a good change. To some extent, Ziji Tongjian is more than one level higher than those Enlightenment books. More importantly, in the Chen Kingdom, this book was a must-read for the emperor. As a prince, you need to understand the way of the emperor from this book. Different people read the same book and have different perceptions. Some people have figured out the way to strengthen the army, some have figured out the way to develop the economy, and some have figured out the art of balancing. This is a treasure. What you can get from it depends on your personal enlightenment. On the road to seize the throne, Zhao Yuan got on the car last, but he was the fastest. Especially when King Kong rolled over and King Duan broke down, he was the only one galloping towards the front. Judging from the current situation, the Tang family has fallen into dust and will be difficult to recover. Zhao Yuan has actually declared victory in advance. With such huge resources, no one, including Chen Huang, can change the future pattern of Chen state. The only difference is whether the process when Chen Huang stepped down and Zhao Yuan came to power was peaceful or violent. Tang Ning couldn't help him with his studies. He still had his own things to do. When a monk strikes a bell, he has not left Chen state after all, but what he is going to strike next is not the bell, but the gentry and dignitaries of Jiangyi. These people are not easy to mess with. The essence of feudal society is exploitation. Everything serves the ruler and the so-called superior powerful. They are the ruling class that the law serves. Where there is rule, there is exploitation. If the people are exploited too hard and their survival is threatened for a long time, they will rise up. This is how most dynasties changed in history. Therefore, the court must prevent large-scale annexation of land and consider the poor people. In this way, it will inevitably have to compete with the gentry and powerful people for profit, and these people often have great energy and will not let the court slaughter them and treat them too harshly. The world will still be in chaos. They can neither advance nor retreat. This is embarrassing Tang Ning and Wang Huai. Tang Ning looked at King Huai in the Ministry of Finance and asked, "Do you have any good ideas?" King Huai sat down, took a sip of tea, and said, "My father asked me to assist Mr. Tang, and I will listen to Mr. Tang. There is one thing about King Huai that is similar to Tang Ning, that is, he is lazy. He will never stand if he can sit, and he will never sit if he can lie down." If there was a more comfortable position than lying down, Tang Ning thought that he would not choose to lie down. If someone could make a decision for him, he would not use his brain. Otherwise. Tang Ning looked at him and said, "We might as well enforce the new tax law. If anyone dares to disobey, I'll take people to raid their homes. If one doesn't comply, one will be confiscated, and if 10 don't comply, they will be confiscated 10, kill the chicken to scare the monkeys, kill one to scare the hundreds, what do you think?" Ahem. King Huai coughed lightly, wiped the tea from the corner of his mouth, put down the teacup, and said, "Isn't this bad?" Tang Ning said, "What's wrong with this? It's simple and straightforward, and it will bring in more money for the national treasury. Why not do it? Violence is not the way to solve the problem. If we suppress it too hard, I am afraid it will cause a civil uprising. It will not be ended by then. Neither Mr. Tang nor I will be able to escape punishment." King Huai shook his head and said, "We should think of him elsewhere." Law. Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "Is there any clever method?" Everyone takes a step back. King Huai knew that he could no longer ignore the matter. After thinking about it, he said, "Cancel some unreasonable tax items and leave some. In this way, we have an explanation to the court and will not force those gentry and powerful people too harshly." Tang Ning glanced at King Huai. His method was a compromise. If used properly, it would not cause too much backlash from the gentry and powerful people. If he had come up with it earlier, King Duan, who took over the matter, would not have been able to do so. Then they would not be impeached and turned into a sieve by the gentry and powerful people who represent the interests of the landlords. Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "When did you come up with this method?" King Huai said, "I just had an idea, I just thought of it." Tang Ning did not expose him, but just shook her head and said, "I am taking too much for granted. Your Majesty wants a thorough tax reform, not a reconciliation. And I am sure that those people will take a step back." King Huai smiled and said, "I am willing to listen to Mr. Tang's advice." Tang Ning thought for a while and asked, "Have you ever heard of such a sentence?" King Huai said, "I would like to hear the details." Tang Ning said, "A philosopher once said that people always like to make compromises. For example, if you say that this room is too dark and you need to open a window here, no one will allow it. But if you advocate removing the roof, they will come. Reconciled, willing to open the window. What Master Tang means is..." King Huai's eyes flashed as he said, "First, we must set a condition that they will never accept, and let them compromise and achieve our goals." Tang Ning said, "Xiaoguo is really smart." King Huai smiled and said, "The smart one is Mr. Tang." He looked at Tang Ning and asked, "What conditions does Master Tang want to offer?" Tang Ning said, "It's very simple. Cancel the poll tax and collect taxes based on land." Prince Huai's watch paused, his expression changed slightly, and he asked, "Master Tang, are you serious?" Tang Ning nodded and said, "Of course." In the Chen state, including all dynasties, tax collection was based on the head. A household paid as much tax as there were people in it. A family of 3 with 10 acres of land, and a powerful family with thousands of acres of fertile land, paid taxes on the land. There is not much difference in tax rates. The gentry and dignitaries who owned a large amount of land did not need to pay taxes corresponding to their large amounts of land. In the long run, the tax revenue of the treasury would drop sharply. Therefore, the court had been trying various methods to avoid land annexation, but with little success. Taxation based not on head but on land can completely solve this problem, but it will inevitably face great opposition from these beneficiaries. By then, Chen state will be in chaos, and no one is willing to bear such consequences. Tang Ning looked at King Huai and said, "Should we collect taxes based on land or streamline the tax system?" I believe they will make the right choice. It's just that in this matter, one person needs to be a good person and the other a bad person. King Huai smiled and said, "I like to be popular." Tang Ning sighed and said, "Unfortunately, I also like to play favorites." He looked troubled and said, "What should we do? There is always someone who wants to play bad guy." King Huai looked at him and asked, "How about?" Tang Ning looked at him and said, "Okay. Household Department." The minister of Hubei was sitting in the Shangshu Yamen, sipping tea leisurely. It was originally the Ministry of Hunan's responsibility to amend the tax law, but this matter would offend too many people. His Majesty was considerate of the Ministry of Hubei and handed over this difficult matter to Ding. The Marquis of Guo and King Huai, the 2 most outstanding young men in the dynasty, greatly reduced his burden. No one knows better than him how much resistance is needed to facilitate this matter. Marquis Dingguo and King Huai are still too young. Qianzhuo shook his head and said with a smile, "What a newborn calf." He took a sip of tea, picked up a folder on the table, and opened a page. Puff! All the tea in Qianzhuo's mouth spurted out, his face changed drastically, and after standing there for a long time, he gritted his teeth and said, "2 little foxes, Fupan Chinese. Fortunate young gentleman." Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 783. Abolish the poll tax and collect taxes based on land. This is just a simple sentence, but if the imperial court really implements this method, I don't know how many people will die and how much the price will be paid because of this sentence. The Ministry of Finance cannot bear the blame. Qianzhuo stood up and secretly cursed Tang Ning and Huai Wang, these two little foxes. They didn't want to cause trouble, so they threw the blame on Hu Bu, but he couldn't afford to offend either of these two people. He took the envelope and walked around the hall. After a long time, he gritted his teeth and strode out of the household department. After a while, Shangshu was saved. Qianzhuo handed a letter to the Prime Minister and said, Marquis Dingguo and King Huai have sent a letter, which needs the Prime Minister's signature. Wang Xiang was checking the memorial. Hearing the words, he put down the memorial in his hand, picked up the envelope, and picked up the seal habitually. When he was about to stamp it on the envelope, he suddenly stopped, picked up the envelope, and read it carefully. Stand up. After a while, he took back the seal, handed it to Qianzhuo again, and said, This is a matter for the Ministry of Revenue. The Ministry of Revenue can make the decision on its own. There is no need for Shangshu to use the seal. Qianzhuo secretly cursed Old Fox in his heart, but a smile appeared on his face and said, This matter, I'm afraid it's not easy for the household department to make the decision. Wang Xiang stood up and said, I suddenly remembered that there are still some things to deal with. Since the Ministry of Revenue cannot make a decision, why don't Lord Qian go and ask His Majesty directly? Watching Wang Xiang hurriedly walk out of Shangshu province, Qianzhuo sighed. Neither the little fox nor the old fox wanted to get involved in this matter, and Hu Buletin would not bear the blame for nothing. He picked up the seal again, walked out of Shangshu province, and asked you. Walk in the direction of the study. Not long after, in the imperial study room, Chen Huang held the envelope in his hand, with a hint of emotion on his face. If taxes were levied based on land, the money collected by the treasury every year would be dozens or hundreds of times more than in the past. I am afraid it would be overflowing. Even he could not imagine such a scene. But he also knew in his heart that this was just his fantasy. If we say that streamlining the tax system is plucking the hair out of the gentry and wealthy families, subverting the tax system is cutting the flesh off their bodies. They will pay dozens or hundreds of times more tax money every year, which will lead to chaos in the world. This is a more serious matter than the Jiangnan Rebellion and the Northwest Rebellion. If you are not careful, the Chen Kingdom will completely become history. He put down the memorial and said, Summon Tang Ning and Prince Huai into the palace. See father. See your majesty. Tang Ning and King Huai walked into the imperial study and saluted Emperor Chen at the same time. Emperor Chen shook the memorial in his hand and asked, Which of you had this idea? King Huai glanced at Tang Ning and said, It was Mr. Tang's idea. Chen Huang looked down and asked, Whose idea was it to have the Ministry of Revenue announce this? Tang Ning looked at King Huai and said, It's His Highness King Huai. You two have a good plan. Huang Chen glanced at them and said, Are you planning to use this trick to scare them first, and then each take a step back to encourage them to accept the streamlined tax system? Your Majesty is aware of everything. Father, your eyes are as bright as a torch. It's a good idea. Chen Huang looked at them and said, But you also know that this matter is very sensitive and the matter is serious. If you are not careful, it will cause a big disaster. Tang Ning clasped her fists and said, Wealth is gained through danger. If this can be done, the national treasury will receive a large amount of additional income every year, and the annual tax collection will also be reduced by more than half. The process will be reduced by more than half. It is really the best of both worlds. King Huai cupped his hands and said, If you don't get into the tiger's den, you won't be able to catch tiger cubs. The complexity and ambiguity of the tax system have already made some people complain. If things go on like this, great conflicts will break out between the people and the court. By then, just streamlining the tax system will probably no longer be effective to effect. Chen Huang did not speak again, but carefully thought about what the two said. As the emperor, he had to strike a balance between the people and the gentry and the powerful. While ensuring the interests of the court, he could neither make the people dissatisfied nor make the gentry resentful, and the two were contradictory. Nowadays, Chen's state is relatively stable, and the conflict between the common people and the gentry is not fierce. Although the court does not need to be afraid of these gentry and wealthy families, there is no need to offend them to death. The joint proposal of Tang Ning and King Huai is a just right compromise. After a moment, he looked at the two of them and said, "I agree to this. You two will cooperate with each other, pay attention to the scale, and go on. I excuse myself. My son, please retire." Seeing Tang Ning and King Huai walking out, Chen Huang had a strange look on his face and said, "They really won't disappoint me." As the younger generation in the court, Tang Ning and King Huai had always done things without leakage. Tang Ning often went out of the capital to carry out secret missions. During his absence, some things that he was not sure to leave to others were left to King Huai. Neither King Huai nor Tang Ning ever let him down. The cooperation between the two is even more flawless. This matter is very important, and a big mistake will cause a big mess. Only when they work together can he feel completely at ease. In the third year of Ding Yuan, one day in October, people who got up early unexpectedly discovered a notice posted in front of the palace. Generally speaking, things that are widely advertised on the walls of the palace must be major events, such as King Kong being deposed, the crown prince ascending the throne, or which law the court has promulgated that is related to the national economy and people's livelihood. Today's notice, I don't know what else I wrote. Some people came closer to watch the excitement, but they didn't know what was written on it. They hurriedly pulled a passing Confucian scholar to ask. After asking, they found out that the court was collecting opinions on a tax law. People could write their opinions and suggestions on this law on paper and throw them into the big box under the city wall. It didn't matter if they couldn't read or write. There were more than 10 clerks under the city wall who could write for them. After learning the content of the tax law, many people were shocked and speechless. According to the rule of collecting taxes per head, it has never changed from ancient times to the present. Many people are tenants and have to pay taxes even if they don't have land. However, those gentry and dignitaries who control a large amount of land do not have to pay much. In addition to paying rent, the people also have to pay taxes from the government. In good years, it's okay, but once there is a disaster, they will definitely not be able to make ends meet and their lives will be difficult to sustain. If this tax law can be implemented, the burden on the people will be at least half lighter. Correspondingly, the gentry and dignitaries who own a large amount of land will have to endure unprecedented pain of cutting flesh. For a while, some people in the capital were happy and some were sad. In a very short time, the situation was completely boiling. In the west market of the capital, Tang Qi looked at the notices posted on the street and said in disbelief, "Is the court crazy? Does it want to be enemies with all the gentry and nobles in the world?" Tang Zhao shook his head and said, "Your Majesty is not stupid. He raised taxes on those people for no reason. If you think about it, you will know that his purpose is not here." Tang Qi doubted, "If not here, then where?" Tang Zhao said, "Didn't the court clamor for streamlining the tax law and removing unnecessary taxes a few days ago? Suddenly, there is no movement these days. Your Majesty's purpose may be here." Tang Qi frowned and said, "Explain clearly." Tang Zhao looked at him, shook his head helplessly, and said, "For example, apples on the street are sold for 10 cents a pound. If you want 5 cents, if you want to buy apples with money, you can offer 1 cent first. The apple vendor will definitely not agree, but he may reduce the price to 9 cents. You raise the price by 2 cents, and he will reduce it. In the end, you may buy apples at a price of 5 cents per caddy. Although you offer 1 cent for the first time, you never thought that you would get the deal at this price. Tang Qi looked at him and said, "You mean, His Majesty knows that these people will not agree, and he just wants to compromise and let them agree to streamline the tax law?" "That's about it." Tang Zhao nodded, looked at the apple vendor, and asked, "How much do these apples cost?" The vendor said, 10 cents per caddy. Tang Zhao asked, "Will you sell it for 1 cent?" The vendor glanced at him and said, "Get lost. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 784. Tang Zhao finally bought several kilograms of apples for 10 cents per kilogram. The hawker said that 10 cents was 10 cents, and he would not give up a penny. No matter how eloquent he was, he would spit and spit, but he would not lose a penny. 10 wen is 10 wen, that's 5 pounds. Tang Zhao handed the apple to Tang Qi and said, "Dad, you go back first, and I'll go shopping later." Tang Qi carried the apple back, while Tang Zhao wandered on the street. First, he found a few old books at a book stall, wandered to a chess stall, and sat opposite the stall owner with interest. There are people who set up chess stalls in Beijing, and they often play chess with passers-by. The passers-by have to pay 10 cash first. If they can win the stall owner will pay double the 20 cash back. If he loses, the 10 cash will naturally be gone. These people who set up stalls used this place to eat, and their chess skills were naturally superb. Few people could beat them. Over time, no one was willing to play with them. After Tang Zhao sat down, he threw down a piece of broken silver and said, "Let's play 2 rounds." The stall owner let him take the lead, and the two drank a cup of tea in silence. When they settled down again, the stall owner suddenly asked, "Do you believe my master now? He is right about many things, but what's the use of believing in him?" Tang Zhao shook his head and said, "King Duan is as stupid as a pig. He can't help him up. If the pig doesn't obey, what can the master do?" The stall owner asked back, "Prince Duan is a pig, wouldn't it be better for your Tang family? If he is as cunning as Emperor Chen, how will your Tang family be able to defeat him in the future?" "There is still a future, there is no future." Tang Zhao casually placed a chess piece and said, "Even you have said that King Run came from behind, and King Duankong was not his opponent. He has the Tang family and the Fang family behind him. What does King Duan win? Your master has guessed so many things, why can't he guess this?" The man said, "Who knows who will win until the last moment?" Tang Zhao asked, "Does he still have a chance to turn defeat into victory?" The owner of the chess stall said, "Didn't my master say that King Run will have to wait for at least 5 years? In these 5 years, anything can happen. Your Tang family is so powerful, and it only took 2 years to defeat him with such a failure, why is it impossible for Tang Ning and the Fang family?" Tang Zhao glanced at him and asked, "Do you think the Tang family is still the same Tang family as before? Although the Tang family has fallen to this point, my master doesn't believe that you don't have any hidden backups." The man shook his head and said, "If the Tang family can't even do this, we won't have to cooperate in the future." Tang Zhao was too lazy to continue the topic with him and asked directly, "Prince Duan will probably be obedient in the future. Has your master told him what to do next?" The man said, "You have to eat one bite at a time, and you have to walk step by step. If there is nothing wrong with the Tang family, let's deal with Prince Kong first. This time the court attacks the powerful, it is a good opportunity." Tang Zhao looked at him and asked, "Are you talking about concubine Zhang Xian's Zhang family?" The stall owner nodded and said, "Although King Kong was temporarily defeated, the Zhang family was not affected at all. They are in charge of the Ximen guards and should not be underestimated." Tang Zhao shook his head and said, "Kong Kong has fallen, but the Zhang family has not fallen. How easy is it to overthrow the Zhang family? This time is a good opportunity. The man put down a chess piece and said, "It's not easy to make these powerful people surrender. You can't kill a chicken to scare the monkeys, just show off. It depends on whether your Tang family has the ability to turn the Zhang family into that. Just a chicken." He glanced at Tang Zhao and said, "That's all I'm going to say. Whether you can seize the opportunity or not depends on your Tang family." Tang Zhao looked at him and asked, "How can I find you next time?" The man put away the chessboard and said with a smile, "I will come to you when needed." Tang Qi returned home carrying several kilograms of apples. When passing by Tang Zhao's room, he paused and looked in. Ever since Tang Jing died and he became the young head of the Tang family, his whole person had changed a lot, so much so that Tang Qi sometimes couldn't believe that he was his son. Although he locked himself in his room to study all day long, Tang Qi didn't believe that a person could change so much in a short period of time. Why did his stupid son suddenly become so sharp-eyed and invincible? He pushed Tang Zhao's door, but it was not closed. Tang Qi walked in slowly, moved away, and picked up a book under his feet. He looked up and saw that the floor, table, bed, and cabinets of his room were all scattered with books in a mess. If the books in his room were neatly arranged, Tang Qi would be suspicious, but the fact that he threw the books so scattered just meant that he had read them. Not everyone has the patience to read so many books, but this perseverance is far beyond the reach of others. Tang Qi stood there in shock for a long time before he reluctantly convinced himself to admit that reading can really transform a person. After becoming the head of the young family, Tang Zhao changed his past playboy and finally became enlightened. This is fine, but if he is still as dandy as before, even if the Tang family can rise, they will be defeated by him sooner or later. He opened the book in his hand to see what he usually read. Azao's imperial examination results were not ideal, but after all, he filled a real vacancy in the civil service department. Tang Qi thought he was reading a history book or something, but he didn't expect it. After turning a few pages, he saw several embarrassing descriptions. Tang Qi turned back to the cover and looked at it, only to see the words "The County Magistrate's Pornographic History" written on it. This turned out to be a book with unsightly erotic content. Tang Qi threw it on the ground and picked up two more books. They turned out to be similar to X Futon and XX Heart Sutra. Opening the content, it is indeed full of indescribable content. Tang Zhao opened the door and saw Tang Qi holding a copy of XX Heart Sutra and looking at it in ecstasy. After being stunned for a moment, he smiled and said, "I didn't expect you to be so good at it, Dad. I still have a few treasured picture books here. Do you want to take a look?" When Tang Zai was in a state of panic, the entire capital was also in panic. A pre-promulgated decree by the imperial court overturned the previous tax system, making the wealthy gentry and powerful people feel terrified. Once the court changes the tax from per capita to tax based on land, the extra tax they pay every year will be dozens to hundreds of times more. What is the difference between this and cutting their flesh? For a time, people with interests in this matter quickly gathered together to discuss countermeasures. Some of them contacted the backers of the DPRK and China to inquire about the situation, and some hired ordinary people to oppose the implementation of this law in real names. This time the imperial court did not directly announce changes to the tax law, but instead solicited the opinions of the people before making changes. They only needed to bribe the people and ask them to put notes with objections into the opinion box at the entrance of the palace. It only cost 5 cents at a time. You can buy enough people. Obviously, this measure of the court is to cut off the flesh of the gentry and the powerful, and it is beneficial to the people. However, selling one's conscience for money has attracted a lot of condemnation from honest people. People of insight who intend to promote the implementation of this law, they angrily called them the Five Wen Party. However, no matter how cheerful the people below were, the imperial court never responded to this matter and seemed to be determined to amend the tax law. This time, the dignitaries and gentry near Jiangxi province who owned a large amount of land but did not have to pay much tax were really panicked. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 785. Although the tax law was not enacted by the Ministry of Household Affairs, the Ministry of Household Affairs has always had a great say in this matter. This time, the imperial court suddenly attacked the gentry and dignitaries who owned a large amount of land. Without any warning, some people who did not know what was going on came up. The one that comes to mind must be the Ministry of Household Affairs. From the Ministry of Household Affairs to the Minister of Finance, to the Secretary of the Ministry of Finance, Zhang Gu, both of them are uneasy. Qianzhuo had just left the office and returned home when several powerful people from Beijing's wealthy families came to visit with gifts. Although Qianzhuo was the minister of the Ministry of Household Affairs and held a high position of power, these wealthy families had a lot of energy and it was difficult to control them. Shut out. These people were all asking about the tax reform. Qianzhuo just pushed it to the court, saying that this matter was directly ordered by His Majesty, and the Ministry of Revenue did not know about it, so he completely shirks the responsibility. These wealthy people came to Qian Mansion, firstly to find out the truth of this matter, and secondly, to find out which damned guy came up with this bad idea. He didn't want them to have an easy time, and they wouldn't make it easy for him either. Unexpectedly, the culprit knew the truth without asking about it. However, despite their great courage, they did not dare to make a mistake in front of His Majesty. After a visit to Qian's mansion, not only did they feel uneasy, but they became even more panicked. Even Qianzhuo, who was the Minister of Household Affairs, didn't know about it, let alone the officials under him, the squires and dignitaries near the capital. They didn't get any news. There was an even deathly silence at the court. In the mansion of a powerful person somewhere, several figures gathered together, talking in various directions. How could the tax system suddenly undergo such a big change? There was no warning at all before. Some time ago, when the imperial court wanted to streamline the tax system, if we had agreed, maybe we wouldn't be what we are today. This is by us. They have never thought about the consequences if they buy us in a hurry. The person at the front looked at him and asked, "What are the consequences? Do you want to rebel? 10,000 cavalry are stationed outside the capital, and there are 16 guards with a total of 100,000 troops. You want your whole family to accompany you die?" The man was immediately speechless. After a long pause, someone asked, "Then what should we do?" "Just wait and see what happens," the leader said. "This matter is not that simple. Let's continue watching for now." Tang Ning went to the office as usual these days and didn't do anything extra. He had already set up a nest and set up a net, and was waiting for the right time to catch the fish in one net. The capital has been in chaos these past few days, and it can be said that people are panicking. Charging taxes based on land is undoubtedly beneficial to the people. Farmers who own land will not have much difference in taxes before and after paying, but they can have children without worrying about the court. The tax falls on their children, increasing the burden on the family. Those who benefited from this tax law were the landless tenants. They did not have land and would no longer have to pay taxes. All the taxes were transferred to the big tycoons and landowners who owned the land. Although these people suffered a loss and would definitely try their best to exploit the tenants, even if they were stripped naked, it would still not be enough to make up for the losses. The gentry and the powerful would have to suffer this loss no matter what. No one likes to suffer losses by nature. These squires and powerful officials tried various methods, but they could not shake the determination of the court. Chaos began to appear in the entire Jiangxi region. In Tang Ning's opinion, this wasn't chaotic enough. In order to add fuel to the fire, he asked the clerks from the Ministry of Revenue to visit one by one and calculate the income of the squire and powerful families this year. Fortunately, at the end of the quarter, he could calculate it in advance. Tax. Half of these small officials in the household department were rejected. Although the other half got in, they tried to pass the buck and almost no one completed the statistical task. The reason why Tang Ning said it was close was because there was still a family that expressed its attitude of obeying the court's arrangements. Tang Ning looked at King Huai and asked, "What is the origin of this Zhang family?" King Huai explained, "The Zhang family is the family of concubine Zhang Xian and is in charge of Zhuoximen guards. The Zhang family is the mother clan of concubine Zhang Xian, and is also the backer of King Kong. Just like the Tang family means to King Duan, it usually means both prosperity and loss. Now that King Kong has become the heir, the Zhang family has nothing at all. It's strange to be implicated." King Huai glanced at him and explained, "The Zhang family is very low-key and never goes against the imperial court. This is normal. The general status of the 16th guards is special, and families like the Xiao family and the Ling family have never disobeyed the imperial court. This situation is easy to understand. The two parties in a conflict who shout the most joy are usually clowns. The real bosses will not be so noisy and will not end up in person. But if they take action, it will be another person." What happened was shocking and deadly. He looked at King Huai and said, "Is it almost done?" King Huai nodded and said, "It's almost done." Tang Ning looked at him and asked, "How about?" King Huai nodded and said, "Very good. Household Department." Qianzhuo looked at the letter in his hand, and combined with the two controversial tax changes, he finally understood and said angrily, "It's too much to bully others." He didn't understand until this moment that the previous letter's proposal to cancel the poll tax and collect taxes based on land was simply a false shot. Their fundamental purpose was still the proposal in this letter to streamline the tax system. These two little foxes are simply in danger. Because of this incident, the powerful gentry in the entire Jiangxi region are already worried to death. Compared with taxing according to land, streamlining the tax system is not a problem at all. The choice between plucking or cutting, everyone knows how to choose. The problem is that these people will definitely react afterwards. When the time comes, whoever proposes streamlining the tax system will be considered the initiator of the whole thing. Qianzhuo walked around in the yamen. After a while, he looked at a clerk and said, "Please come over, Mr. Fang and Mr. Wu." After a while, the clerk and an official came in. Qianzhuo looked at him and asked, "Where is Minister Fang?" The clerk said, "Shilang Fang said he was feeling unwell and went home early." "Forget it, forget it." Qianzhuo waved his hand, looked at the right minister of the Ministry of Civil Affairs, who had just taken office, and said with a smile, "Servant Wu, I have something important to give you." The recent tax reform has pushed the Ministry of Household Affairs, one of the 6 ministries, to the forefront. There were Qianzhuo, the Minister of Household Affairs, Fang Jie, the left minister, and Wu Bo, the right minister. Only Wu Bo came from a wealthy family in the capital, and there were countless people who wanted to get information from him. Between these two, the Wu family had an endless stream of guests. As soon as Wu Bojin returned home, several people were waiting in the hall. When Wu Bo stepped into the hall, several heads of wealthy families came up to him and asked impatiently, "How is it, Mr. Wu, has the court made a decision?" Wu Bodeo, "This matter is of great importance and the court has not decided yet, but things have finally turned around." "What's the turning point?" "Master Wu, tell me quickly." Several people were overjoyed when they heard this and spoke one after another. "Wu Bodeo, I have contacted several colleagues and will report to His Majesty in the morning tomorrow, requesting the imperial court to streamline the tax system as soon as possible. If His Majesty agrees, the tax reform will be postponed temporarily, and the streamlined tax system will be implemented in Jiangxi province. It will take at least 5 years for the whole country. After 5 years, it is not certain what the tax reform will be like. Someone looked at him and asked, "If this happens, aren't we the ones who will suffer?" Wu Bo glanced at him and said, "You should just accept it as soon as you see fit. If you offend His Majesty, no one will end well." The expressions of several people changed. After weighing the pros and cons, they finally made up their mind and gritted their teeth and said, "If His Majesty takes back the tax reform order and streamlines the tax system, it is not impossible to discuss." Fupan Chinese. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 786. Tax reform has been fermenting for several days. Wu Bo, the Right Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Revenue, and more than 10 officials proposed a proposal at the morning court today. Guangxia Literature Network. Tax reform involves many things and is of great importance. It is better to slow down rather than rush. They suggest that the court should take it step by step. It is better to streamline the complicated tax system first, and then talk about tax reform. Chen State is a country with dozens or hundreds of prefectures. Any decree issued by the court cannot be completed overnight. It will take at least 5 or 6 years to popularize the tax system alone to all prefectures. By then, it is unknown whether the Emperor Chen is still in power. Who will remember this decree? This Right Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Revenue took over Han Ming's position not long ago. He came from the capital and his family is also a well-known noble family in the capital. Naturally, he does not want the court to cut off these noble families. After this proposal was put forward, many officials in the court echoed it. There are too few poor people who can stand out from the imperial examination and be in the court. The officials in the court are either from powerful and wealthy families or from humble families. But even if they are from humble families, they must be local landlords who own countless fields and have a vested interest in this proposal. This is actually an important reason why the court cannot abolish the head tax and levy taxes according to the fields. All the decisions of the court are for the ruling class, and the officials who make up the court are the rulers. How could they be willing to cut from themselves to subsidize the common people? There are too many officials who seconded this proposal, and even Emperor Chen cannot act alone. After leaving the court, he convened the important officials in the court to discuss and formally passed Wu Bo's proposal to streamline the tax system. Half a month ago, the gentry and dignitaries who were still opposed to streamlining the tax system seemed very cooperative this time, and there was no discordant voice before and after. After all, the court has already made concessions. If they still don't know what's good for them and cause His Majesty to regret, it will not benefit anyone. Many people sighed when they heard the news. They thought that the court would completely stand on their side this time, but they didn't expect that they would succumb to power in the end. However, despite their disappointment, they were relatively satisfied with the final result. Even if the head tax could not be abolished, there were many fewer taxes and levies. For some people, it was more than half easier than before. The gentry and dignitaries who finally breathed a sigh of relief, after calming down, gradually realized that something seemed to be wrong. The court wanted to implement a streamlined tax system half a year ago, but they were jointly opposed. After that, they mentioned it several times, but nothing happened. But who would have thought that after a long circle in the past 6 months, this matter was finally implemented? In a mansion of a certain dignitary, a man suddenly realized and murmured, "Could this be the original purpose of the court? What a good plan!" In a certain wealthy family's house, another man said with a gloomy face, "What a good Wu Bo, do you think we are fools?" After the dust settled, the calm people gradually realized that if the original purpose of the court was never tax reform, but to streamline the tax system, then all of them had fallen into the scheme of the court and His Majesty. First, they put forward a condition that they could not accept, and then greatly lowered the requirements. In comparison, normal people would choose the second one. But in fact, even the second requirement was something they were unwilling to accept. It was only because of the comparison that they had the illusion of taking advantage. In fact, they still suffered a loss. In this way, Wu Bo, the right assistant minister of the Ministry of Revenue, was not thinking about them at all. This was originally a plot of the court. He dug a pit and let them jump into it, and they actually wanted to be grateful to him. What a swindler! Mr. Wu, I will remember this account. After the tax reform of the Wu family was settled, the outside world suddenly changed. After Wu Bo heard the report from the servants in the mansion, his face was as gloomy as water, and he said angrily, "Mr. Qian, you old fox, are you still a human being?" It was not until this moment that he understood why the Minister of Revenue did not propose it himself, but gave this good opportunity to him. He must have known at that time that this was a black pot, and Qianchuo was unwilling to bear this pot, so he let Wu Bo bear it. When Wu Bo scolded Qianchuo at home, Qianchuo sat steadily in the Shangshu Yamen, sipping tea leisurely and comfortably, and secretly made up his mind that he must stay away from Tang Ning and King Huai, the two cunning foxes, in the future. In the imperial study, Emperor Chen smiled, and his heart was obviously good. What was originally opposed by the powerful and wealthy families, after this plan, turned out to be something they begged the court to implement. Once this decree is implemented, it can firstly reduce the burden on the people and benefit the long-term stability of the country. Secondly, the tax items are unified and simple, which can save a lot of manpower and material resources. Thirdly, it can also increase the income of the national treasury, which can be said to be killing three birds with one stone. More importantly, the court did not pay any price for these three gains. It is the most smoothly implemented law in recent years. King Huai has been implementing this decree for half a year, but there has been no progress. When Tang Ning took over, he was also at a loss. However, with the combination of the two swords, they actually did a great job in such a short time, which pleased him deeply. He thought of a possibility in his mind, and flipped open a letter casually. When he saw the content written on it, his face sank. The secret agent who went to Guizhou to investigate has disappeared. Although Qiandi does not belong to the Chen state, it has a special location and can easily threaten Jiangnan. Only when everything in Guizhou is within his sight can he feel at ease. He clenched his fists, looked at Wei Jian, and said, "Send more people to go to Guizhou to investigate." Tang Ning was sitting in the yard, and Fang Xinyu sat opposite him boredly, flipping through a flower rope in his hand, then throwing it away and asking, "Brother Tang Ning, when will the young lady come back?" Tang Ning shook her head and said, "I don't know either. The old beggar often takes Xiao Xiao out for travel, but usually it only lasts for 1 or 2 months, and the longest is no more than 3 months. This time, he has been away for more than half a year and has not come back." With the old beggar around, Tang Ning wasn't worried about his little safety, but none of them had sent a letter back, which made him feel a little unsure. She was as pure as a little white flower. If he taught her to become a female devil, Tang Ning couldn't imagine this scene. After all, when the old beggar was young, he had the experience of traveling and fighting all over the world. "I didn't receive the little letter, but yesterday I received another letter from Sume." Things in Guizhou were more troublesome than she expected. Judging from the current situation, she would have to stay there for a long time. Fang Xinyu held her chin, sighed softly, and said, "Where is she?" "A certain state in Chu State." From a well-known sect, several figures limped out of the mountain gate, and the leader bowed, "Senior, walk slowly." A slovenly old man waved his hand and left with a tall girl. Watching the two of them walk away, the sect owner breathed a sigh of relief. On the mountain road, the girl looked up at the old man and said, "Master, I want to go home. It's only been more than half a year since we came out." The old man looked at her, thought for a moment, and said, "We'll hit 10 more houses and we'll go back." Fupan Chinese. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 787. After settling the Jiangnan case and streamlining the tax system, Tang Ning asked Prime Minister Wang for a short vacation and prepared to have a good rest. Emperor Chen knew that the things he had done recently were not easy, so he let him go. Su Mei and Xiao Xiao were not at home, and the house was a little less lively. Yesterday Zhong Yi told him that she and her mother-in-law were going back to Lingzhou to worship, and Su Ryu would also go back together. In this way, after they left, only Tang Ning and Tang Yaoyao were left at home. Tang Yaoyao has been preparing for the caravan to go to the grassland these days. The first caravan has just set off, and she has started preparing for the second caravan. She is extremely busy. Tang Ning can only see her at night sometimes. Tang Ning arranged an accompanying team of hundreds of people for them. They were all elite disciples of the beggar clan. These people had been practicing martial arts for several years. Their daily practice was mainly based on formations. Even if they were old beggars, they would not be able to get anything from them. The benefits are enough to take on the responsibility of guarding. Moreover, wherever they went, they would contact the local branch of the beggar clan in advance. Tang Ning was not afraid of any danger to her group. The only pity was that he took leave because he wanted to spend time with them, but as a result, Tang Yaoyao was the only one left in the family. He and Tang Yaoyao had been in a strange state for a long time. They were said to be husband and wife. They ate together and slept together, but they only ate and slept together. Tang Ning couldn't figure out her thoughts many times. In fact, he had never been good at guessing girls' thoughts. He and Zhong Yi had a misunderstanding, and he and Xiao Ryu were childhood sweethearts. Su Mei, Li Tianlan, Zhao Man, and Wan Yanyan all took the initiative, but there was a misunderstanding with Tang Yaoyao. But their relationship cannot always exist in the form of misunderstanding. He has been running around here and there for the past 2 years and has not had the chance to calm down and have a good talk with her. At this moment, he can no longer delay it. Aha! Hearing a voice, Tang Ning raised her head and saw Rich Man Tang walking out from behind the moon gate. She stood up, cupped her hands and said, "Father-in-law." Rich Man Tang looked at him and asked, "Where is Yao Yao?" Tang Ning said, "I went out early in the morning." Rich Man Tang asked, "Where have you gone?" Tang Ning thought for a while and said, "I should go to the shop." "Should it?" Rich Man Tang snorted coldly and said, "As her husband, you don't even know where your wife has gone. Do you think it's appropriate?" Rich Man Tang's tone was a little strange today. He had never been like this when Xiao Ryu Xiaoi was at home. Moreover, when Tang Yaoyao made a show of marrying him, Rich Man Tang strongly opposed it, but now he seems to have acquiesced in the matter. Tang Ning stood up and walked towards the door, saying, "I'm going to find her." "Come back," Rich Man Tang whispered, pointed to the stone bench beside him, and said, "Sit down." Tang Ning came back, sat on the stone bench, and asked, "Father-in-law, what else is there?" Rich Man Tang glanced at him and said, "I know you are now a high official and busy with official duties, but no matter how busy you are with official duties, you should also take care of your family." Tang Ning, who had been absent from work every 3 days, was actually very family-oriented, but when she explained to Rich Man Tang, he wouldn't listen. Tang Ning could only nod her head. Rich Man Tang looked at him and said, "I only have one daughter, Yao Yao. Yao Yao's mother passed away early. From childhood to adulthood, I never let her suffer any injustice. If you dare to let her suffer, I can't spare you." Tang Ning waved her hands repeatedly, "No. Let the third lady suffer injustice, whether he has the ability or not, he must have the courage. Whether she has been wronged, you know in your heart." Rich Man Tang glanced at him and said, "She is very busy these days." You are his husband-in-law. When you are fine, spend more time with her and make her happy. Tang Ning said, if my father-in-law had not said so, I would have done the same. Remember what you said. Rich man Tang glanced at him and walked away. Tang Ning sat in the courtyard and thought for a while, then stood up and walked out of the house. On the streets of the capital, Xiu'er followed Tang Yaoyao and muttered, the first lady and the second lady are not here. This is a good opportunity for you, young lady. Tang Yaoyao walked towards a shop in front and asked casually, what's a good opportunity? Of course they become a real couple. Xiu'er looked at her and said helplessly, how long will you wait? Tang Yaoyao tapped her forehead and said, children, please stay out of adults' affairs. Xiu'er straightened her chest and said, Miss, I am already 19 years old. The maid from another family is 19 years old and has been married long ago. Tang Yaoyao glanced at her and asked, do you want to get married? I don't want to. Xiu'er hugged her arm tightly and said, I want to be with the lady for the rest of my life. Tang Yaoyao said, then you can't get married. Xiu'er curled her lips and said, I am the first wife, I will marry whomever the young lady marries. Tang Yaoyao pinched her face and said, don't think that I don't know your thoughts. You have been wanting to take advantage of that guy for a long time. Who's cheaper? Tang Ning asked in surprise when she heard Tang Yaoyao and Xiu'er talking about cheap things as soon as she walked into the shop. Nothing. Tang Yaoyao glanced at him and asked, why are you here? I'm bored at home, let's go out and hang out. Tang Ning looked at Xiu'er and asked doubtfully, Xiu'er, why are you blushing? Xiu'er covered her face and said hurriedly, no. Tang Ning was too lazy to ask her any more questions. He accompanied Tang Yaoyao to visit several shops, and it was getting late. Xiru and Xiaoi were not there, so he could only sleep in Tang Yaoyao's room tonight. Tang Yaoyao took a bath, and when she returned to her room, she saw a few side dishes on the table. Tang Ning looked at her and said, you didn't eat much in the afternoon, so I made a few side dishes for you to have as a midnight snack. Tang Yaoyao walked over and saw that the table was full of her favorite dishes. She looked at him suspiciously and asked, do you have something to ask me? Tang Ning shook his head and said, no. Tang Yaoyao still didn't believe it and asked, then why are you so nice to me? Tang Ning crossed his arms and asked, am I not nice enough to you? Tang Yaoyao glanced at him and didn't answer. She asked, when will Xiru and Xiaoi come back? Tang Ning thought about it and said, it will take at least more than a month to come back and forth. Tang Yaoyao was secretly happy, but didn't show it. She tasted a bite of the dish and said, it tastes good. Tang Ning made 4 side dishes, but the amount of each dish was not much. The two of them finished the 4 dishes and drank some wine, and then prepared to rest. Tang Yaoyao took a bath today, and when he lay next to Tang Ning, he smelled a sweet fragrance. This smell made Tang Ning a little distracted. He had been thinking about something all day, and only at this moment did he make a decision. At first, they were both lying flat. At one point, Tang Ning turned his head to look at her. Tang Yaoyao turned his head to look at him. Seeing that his eyes were a little strange, his face turned red and asked, what are you doing? Tang Ning looked into her eyes, and Tang Yaoyao's eyes immediately dodged. He asked in a weak voice, why are you looking at me? Tang Ning looked at her and asked, do you remember that you owe me something? Tang Yaoyao squinted and asked, is there? Tang Ning asked, you lost the bet last time, and you need to promise me something, or anything. Have you forgotten? Seeing that he couldn't get away with it, Tang Yaoyao simply said, what do you want? Tang Ning looked into her eyes and said, I want you. Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 788. When Tang Yaoyao lost to Tang Ning in a bet last time, she waited expectantly for him to make some unreasonable request, but in the end, he asked her to learn 3 pig sounds. She swore that if he asked her to imitate a pig this time, she would beat him into a pig's head. However, after waiting for a long time, she still didn't get Tang Ning's follow-up words, so she asked in surprise, "What do you want from me?" Tang Ning said, "I want you to be my wife and give me children in the future." Tang Yao Yao looked at him blankly, her lips slightly opened, and her face turned red. Tang Ning looked at her and asked, "Are you willing?" Tang Nuxia, who had always been fearless, was now like a timid quail, burying her head in the quilt and saying in a trembling voice, I'm not ready yet." Tang Ning looked at her seriously and asked, "Does that mean you are willing?" She didn't know how long she had been waiting for the sentence. Tang Yao Yao nodded slightly, twisted his hands together in the quilt, his face was extremely red with shame, and whispered, "I am willing." Untouched girls are always shy. Even though Tang Yajing is usually fearless, when encountering this kind of thing, she is still just a woman, with the natural reserve of a girl. Tang Ning held her hand under the quilt, waited for a moment, and asked softly, "Are you ready now?" Tang Yao Yao raised her head, her face turned even redder, and before she could speak, she was kissed on the lips. Her beautiful eyes slowly closed, but her body suddenly straightened up, and the red cloud on her pretty face gradually spread to her neck. A brocade quilt cannot cover up the spring scenery in the house, with tall stockings and gold hairpins hanging sideways, vowing sea and mountain alliances, shy of clouds and timid rain, and the chirping of warblers, never leaving my ears. At noon, the sun was high in the sky. Xiu'er stood outside the courtyard, looked inside, and said in surprise, "It's already 3 o'clock in the morning, why don't you and I get up?" She walked in quietly and pushed the door gently. The door was not closed tightly. When she walked in, Tang Yao Yao was standing by the bed, hiding something in her arms in a panic. Xiu'er said in surprise, "Miss, what are you doing?" Tang Yao Yao glared at her and said, "You go out first and come in later." Xiu'er turned around in surprise, but then suddenly turned around again the next moment, walked quickly to the bed, pointed to the missing piece on the bed sheet, looked at Tang Yao Yao, and said in shock, "Miss, you and my uncle you." Tang Yao Yao's face turned red with embarrassment and said, "Don't say it." Xiu'er's face turned red and she said, "Miss, I'll get you some water to wash up." No need. Tang Ning walked in with a basin of hot water, wetted a towel and handed it to Tang Yao Yao, who gave her a slightly annoyed look. Tang Ning happily accepted her look. Ever since Tang Yajing threw down the hydrangea on Zhong Yi's behalf 4 years ago, they had stumbled all the way and experienced countless things. It wasn't until last night that they became a real couple. For this, they had to bear her mere humiliation. Rolling your eyes means nothing. After Tang Yao Yao washed her face, she sat in front of the dressing table and said angrily, "Help me draw my eyebrows." The ancients regarded eyebrow drawing as the most interesting thing in the boudoir. Tang Ning actually did a lot of drawing and grooming for them on weekdays. Now, in addition to being inferior to Xiu'er, he has surpassed the maids Qing'er and Xiao Tao in grooming skills. When Tang Ning helped her draw her eyebrows, she thought to herself that she was stupid. If she had known that Fairy Tang had been waiting for him for a long time, why would he wait until now? After officially taking that step, the chivalrous Tang Fairy also became disgusted. It took Tang Ning half an hour to help her dress up, and then the two of them planned to go out. Lu Ya invited them to visit Xiao's house a few days ago. She is pregnant now and has difficulty moving, so she often invites them to accompany her to relieve her boredom. Tang Yajing, a first-time wife, was still feeling a little unwell. Tang Ning helped her get into the carriage. She reached out and pinched Tang Ning's waist gently and said, "It's all your fault. You slept alone at night." After saying that, she felt a little regretful. After finally being able to live a life with just the two of them, she was reluctant to let Tang Ning sleep alone, so she changed her words, "It's okay to sleep with me, but you can't touch me." Tang Ning said, "Okay, okay, I'll listen to you." Tang Yao Yao glanced at him and suddenly asked, "Would you like Xiu'er to serve you tonight?" Tang Ning shook her head and said, "How can this be done? Why isn't this possible?" Tang Yao Yao said, "She is originally the maid of the first wife. If you don't want her, she will be alone for the rest of her life. Do you want to watch her be alone for the rest of her life?" Tang Ning thought for a while and said, "She is only 19, let's wait 2 years. Tang Yao Yao showed an angry look on her face and said, "Okay, you really still have Xiu'er's idea in mind. Did you also have Qing'er and Xiao Tao's idea in mind?" The conscience of heaven and earth, if Tang Ning had any idea of them, Qing'er and Xiu'er would no longer be young girls, he would just follow her words. After last night, Fairy Tang was obviously more difficult to deal with. Could it be that after a girl became a woman, her IQ also increased overnight? Fortunately, it was a fact that Xiu'er was the maid of the first wife. Tang Yejing pinched him and then leaned on the mat with her eyes closed to rest. She worked very late last night. Not only her, but Tang Ning was also a little tired now. When they arrived at Xiao's house, they unexpectedly found that King Huai and Princess Huai were also there. Tang Ning once heard Xiao Ju mention that concubine Yang passed away when King Huai was young. For a period of time, Queen Xiao took him with her and raised him. However, not long after, Queen Xiao also passed away due to illness, but King Huai remembered this kindness and often came to Xiao Mansion to visit Mr. Xiao. Mr. Xiao was not in the mansion today. Lu Ya and Princess Huai Tang Yao Yao were talking in the room. Tang Ning and Prince Huai Xiaoju were sitting in the pavilion outside drinking tea. Xiaoju took a gulp of tea and said, "Pregnant women are so hard to serve. The candied fruit was too sweet and it was my fault. The candied fruit was not sweet and it was also my fault. She even blamed me for the late sunrise this morning. Can you understand this feeling?" Tang Ning and Prince Huai did not speak. He seemed to have thought of something again. He waved his hand and said to himself, "Forget it. You won't understand even if I tell you. After all, your wife has never been pregnant." Tang Ning could hear that although Xiaoju was complaining, he was full of pride in his heart. After all, among the 3 people present, he got married the latest, but had a child the earliest. This was one of the few things that made him better than Tang Ning and Prince Huai. After invisibly hitting Tang Ning and King Huai, Xiaoju was not satisfied. He looked at them and said, "You have been married for so long, why is there no movement? You two are not really having any problems, right? Do you need me to teach you some experience?" "No. Shut up." King Huai and Tang Ning spoke at the same time. Xiaoju looked at them pitifully and said, "Do you think Yaer gave birth to a boy or a girl this time? I hope it's a girl, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, we still have to have more children in the future." Tang Ning took a deep breath and resisted the urge to slap him. He picked up the teacup, gestured to King Huai, and said, "This tea is good." King Huai picked up the teacup, took a sip, and said, "I think so too." In the room, Lu Ya looked at Tang Yao Yao and said in surprise, "Why do I feel that Yao Yao is more beautiful than before?" Tang Yao Yao said shyly, "Really?" "Really?" Lu Ya looked at her and said, "Especially your eyebrows today, they are so beautifully drawn. Are they drawn by Xiu'er? Let her come home someday and teach our Xiao'er." Tang Yao Yao blushed and said, "It was my husband who drew them for me." Lu Ya was surprised and said, "He can also draw your eyebrows." Princess Huai smiled and said, "There is nothing strange about this. His Highness also draws my eyebrows for me every day. He often says that there is no greater joy in the boudoir than drawing eyebrows." In the pavilion outside the courtyard, Xiaoju was still talking non-stop, "You don't know how unreasonable pregnant women are. She actually wanted me to draw her eyebrows this morning. How can a man of 7 feet do such a thing? Fortunate young gentleman." Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 789. Thrush is a couple's interest and has nothing to do with being 7 feet 8 feet 7 inches 8 inches tall. Some people regard it as a way of flirting, while others think it is detrimental to a man's dignity. Tang Ning and King Huai looked at each other and smiled, refusing to explain to someone like Xiaoju who had no interest at all. Prince Huai and Marquis Dingguo were both doting on their wives. This was the biggest thing they had in common besides being unable to have children. This was known to almost everyone in the capital. General Xiao was not at the house. King Huai and Princess Huai stayed for a while, then said goodbye and left. Tang Ning sent them away from the Xiao mansion. King Huai helped Princess Huai get into the carriage. He looked back at Tang Ning and said, "Thank you." Tang Ning asked, "Thank you for what?" King Huai thanked Tang Ning inexplicably, but didn't say anything. Tang Ning and Tang Yao Yao stayed at Xiao's house for half an hour. When they were about to leave, General Xiao happened to return home and asked them to have dinner together. Tang Ning did not good to refuse. Xiaoju looked at General Xiao and said, "Dad, King Huai just came to visit you. They stayed for a while and left after you were not here." "I understand." Mr. Xiao nodded, looked at Tang Ning, and said with a smile, "Master Tang, sit down." After Tang Ning sat down, she took a sip of tea, looked at Mr. Xiao, and asked as if unintentionally, "Does His Highness Prince Huai come to Xiao Mansion often?" Mr. Xiao looked at him and said with a smile, "King Huai will come every few months, just because the Queen was kind to him and he came to see the old man. You don't have to worry about King Huai threatening King Run." Tang Ning was a little embarrassed when Mr. Xiao's words hit home, but Xiaoju seemed to have discovered something and asked, "Prince Run, what's wrong with Prince Run?" Mr. Xiao glanced at him and said, "You go out, I have something to say with Mr. Tang." Xiaoju asked curiously, "What are you talking about?" "Stop talking nonsense," Mr. Xiao glared at him and said, "Go out if I ask you to." Mr. Xiao's words still worked. Xiaoju glanced at Tang Ning and walked out honestly. After Xiaoju left, Mr. Xiao looked at Tang Ning again and said, "You made this move very well. With concubine Shu inside and the Fang family outside, plus you, King Run has a smooth road ahead." Zhao Yuan has already started reading Ziji Tongjian, which means that he has begun to enter Chen Wang's site and has officially entered the site of hundreds of officials. Tang Ning has no need to hide it from Mr. Xiao. She smiled, shook her head and said, "This is also true. If there is nothing I can do, I have no choice but King Run." "You still underestimate yourself a little." Mr. Xiao glanced at him and said, "Do you know how difficult it is to force the Tang family to this point?" Tang Ning looked at Mr. Xiao and said with a smile, "I'm afraid no one knows this matter better than this junior." In 3 years, from the time he entered Beijing, from the Hanlin Academy, to the 6th Ministry, to the Shaanxi province, he spent more than 3 years, bit by bit, eating up the Tang family step by step. The hardships involved, how could he not know? Although the Tang family is gone, don't think that you have a guaranteed victory. Mr. Xiao glanced at him and asked, "Do you know why His Majesty has been so partial to Prince Duan and the Tang family in recent years?" Tang Ning shook his head. When he arrived here, the Tang family was already at its peak. He didn't know much about what happened before. "Your Majesty's situation back then was actually similar to that of King Run now." Mr. Xiao took a sip of tea and said, "He was neither the legitimate son nor the eldest son of the late emperor, so he had no advantages at all. At that time, he was the only one who could seize the legitimate son. It's a real attempt to seize the heir, murderous at every step, and dangerous. If you are not careful, you will be doomed and die without a burial place." Tang Ning glanced at him and asked, "Did the Tang family allow His Majesty to sit on the throne?" "That's right." Mr. Xiao nodded and said, "At that time, the Tang family's influence in the court was even greater than 3 years ago. His Majesty married concubine Tang Hui, gained the support of the Tang family, and moved his brothers one by one. Defeated and finally got this position." Mr. Xiao said it calmly, but Tang Ning knew very well that behind this calmness, there must be countless dangers of blood and fire. Tang Ning said, is this also the reason why His Majesty suppressed the Tang family? Mr. Xiao gave him an appreciative look and said, no emperor wants to see a force like the Tang family appear in the court, whether it is Tang Huai's Tang or Tang Ning's Tang. There was a hint of reminder in Mr. Xiao's words. Tang Ning understood. He nodded and said, thank you, Mr. Xiao, for reminding me. Mr. Xiao continued, because of this, in these years, although His Majesty has been gradually suppressing the power of the Tang family in the court, he still dotes on concubine Tang Hui and Prince Duan. Prince Kong is the eldest son, but His Majesty favors Duan even more. King, concubine Tang Hui is not the first to enter the palace, but she has concubine Zhang Xian and concubine Yang under her. Even the queen must avoid her. What Mr. Xiao is telling you now are all palace secrets. Decades ago, the Tang family placed a heavy bet on Emperor Chen and completed a huge gamble. The important thing is that they made the right bet, and this is how concubine Tang Hui and Prince Duan became. Mr. Xiao continued, in addition, he is also very tolerant of other aspects of the Tang family. Since he started because of the Tang family, he will definitely not kill them all. No one can predict it until the last moment. The end of this heirloom. Be careful with everything. He glanced at Tang Ning and said, His Majesty has always acted for profit. You can't even imagine how ruthless he is. Tang Ning nodded and said, Junior knows. There is one more thing. I think it's better to tell you. Old Master Xiao looked at Tang Ning and said, when your parents eloped, they fled from the capital to Lingzhou and almost escaped from the state of Chen. The world is so big that it's like looking for a needle in a haystack to find someone. The Tang family alone can't find them. When Tang Ning walked out of the room, Xiao Ju immediately came over and asked, what did my father say to you? Tang Ning said, go ask old Master Xiao yourself. Xiao Ju curled his lips and said, if I dare to ask him, do I need to ask you? Tang Ning said, he told me some secrets of the court. Xiao Ju looked incredulous and said, my father just said that the threat to Prince Huai and Prince Run must not be that simple. Tang Ning had no choice but to wave at him, and Xiao Ju leaned over to listen. Tang Ning whispered something in his ear. Xiao Ju's body trembled, his face showed disbelief, and he murmured, you actually. Since Mr. Xiao already knew, it doesn't matter if he tells Xiao Ju. If Tang Ning has someone in the capital who can be fully trusted, Xiao Ju must be one of them. This news shocked Xiao Ju so much that he hadn't recovered after Tang Ning and Tang Yao Yao left. Lu Ya came over with a bulging belly and said dissatisfiedly, Prince Huai and Marquis Dingguo both drew eyebrows. For the lady, look at you again. How can a man do such a shameless thing? Xiao Ju said, they are shameless, I still want. Lu Ya took a deep breath and suppressed the anger in her heart. Thinking of what Princess Huai told her, she forced a smile and said, just draw for someone once. Someone. Xiao Ju was still thinking about the matter of Prince Run's succession, and subconsciously asked, who is that person? You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Fortunate Young Gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 790. After Tang Ning and Tang Yao Yao returned from Xiao Mansion, Tang Yao Yao was called away by rich man Tang. Tang Ning sat alone in the courtyard for a while, then stood up and walked towards the most secluded courtyard of the Tang family. Tang Yu was sitting in the courtyard, holding needle and thread in her hand, doing needlework, but it was not embroidery. A small dress with flowers embroidered on the sleeves and neckline was already in prototype. After sitting for a long time, her shoulder was a little sore, so she stretched out a hand to give it a beating. When she was about to continue, an extra hand appeared on her shoulder and gently helped her hold it. She looked back and said with a smile, Manor came to see you just now. She just left not long ago. You should go find her quickly. Tang Ning shook her head and said, there's no rush. Tang Yu picked up the needle and thread again and said, while the girl hasn't forgotten her yet, I want to make some small clothes for the children to wear in the future. Tang Ning rubbed her shoulders and asked, how about I ask Xiu to help you? She is very clever and can do this very quickly. No need. Tang Yu smiled and said, I have nothing to do anyway, so I might as well find something to do to pass the time. Tang Ning stopped forcing herself, paused, and asked, Mom, 20 years ago, you and your father had traveled so far to Lingzhou. How were you found in the end? Lingzhou already belongs to the north of Chen State, so it is very convenient whether they are fleeing to the western regions or Chu State. Since the two of them can run from the capital to Lingzhou and live in peace along the way, there is no reason to be found in such a place. Tang Yu stopped moving her hands, shook her head and said, why do you ask this? Tang Ning asked, in addition to the Tang family, the people who were searching for you back then were also the imperial court, right? Tang Yu was silent for a moment, then nodded and said, at that time, the Tang family was in great power, and all the state capitals were covered with our portraits. A lot of things happened. We are lucky to escape to Lingzhou. After hearing this, Tang Ning no longer needed to continue asking. The laws of Chen State are relatively strict. It is impossible for the local government to implement such a nationwide wanted order without the nod of Emperor Chen. If you think about it carefully, this is normal. The Tang family was so powerful back then. It was impossible for Chen Huang to go against the Tang family's wishes just for the sake of a young lady from the Tang family and a Jiangnan scholar. Tang Yu looked at him and said, promise me, you won't resent His Majesty for this matter, and you won't do anything irrational. Tang Ning knew that she was worried about what she would do impulsively. He smiled and said, don't worry, the Tang family has received the punishment they deserve. This matter ends here, and I won't do anything more. It's best if you think so. Tang Yu looked at him and said, you don't understand His Majesty. Over the years, he has been sitting in that supreme position and has restrained himself a lot without enemies. It's actually far scarier than you think. Tang Ning heard similar comments about Chen Huang twice today. They had all experienced that era and must know many things that Tang Ning didn't know. Tang Ning was suddenly full of curiosity about the previous era of the Chen kingdom. Emperor Chen's status was equal to that of Prince Run, but his background was far less powerful than Prince Run's. From the few words of Mr. Xiao, Tang Ning guessed Hu Chen Wang's brother Huang is not as useless as Prince Duan and Prince Kong. Under such circumstances, Chen Wang's ability to buck the trend and ascend to the throne was definitely not as simple as Tang Ning had read from the history books. The history books that Tang Ning could find gave a very simple description of Emperor Chen before he ascended the throne. In the autumn of the 16th year of Emperor Xian's reign, Prince Rui fell into the water and drowned. King Suqi was seriously ill, and the emperor died. Emperor Chen's name was Zhao Zheng, and King Qin was his title before he ascended the throne. At that time, he ranked fourth in the royal family, with the prince and two royal brothers above him. In the last year of the late emperor's death, the prince accidentally fell into the water and died. The second prince, King Su, was seriously ill and died. As for the third prince, as early as a year ago, he was demoted to a commoner due to political problems and was exiled without a trace. The emperor's throne naturally, it fell on Chen Huang. The words in history books have no warmth, and without personal experience, you don't know the weight of every word or sentence in them. Tang Ning looked at Tang Yu and asked, Mom, how did your Majesty become the emperor back then? Tang Yu was born in the Tang family. Before she eloped, Emperor Chen had already ascended the throne. During that time, the Tang family was always at the center of the whirlpool in the capital. Naturally, she knew much more than others. She put down the needle and thread in her hand, recalled for a moment, and then slowly said, in the beginning, among the princes of the late emperor, your Majesty was just a very ordinary one, and the queen mother was not one of the late emperor's favorite concubines. Although the late emperor had established a prince in his early years, the second prince and the third prince did not give up. The three of them almost divided the court. They fought bloody battles for the throne, and the court was full of chaos until later. Tang Ning asked, until the Tang family intervened and sided with His Majesty. Tang Yu looked at him, nodded, and said, "The Tang family has helped His Majesty a lot. Without the Tang family, there would be no His Majesty today." A hint of doubt appeared on Tang Ning's face, and she asked, since the three princes were so powerful at that time, why did the Tang family choose to help the powerless Majesty? "It is precisely because His Majesty has no power and no one around him that he can be used, so the Tang family chose him." Tang Yu shook her head and said, "Only in this way, after His Majesty ascends the throne, no one will compete with them for the huge benefits." Tang Ning said, "At that time, they didn't understand His Majesty. They didn't know that after he ascended the throne, he would suppress the Tang family, right? You are still young and don't understand some things." Tang Yu looked at him, shook her head again, and said, "Many things are not black and white. After His Majesty ascended the throne, he did continue to suppress the Tang family, but the fourth sister was favored in the palace and soon gave birth to Prince Duan. Over the years, His Majesty's favorite prince is Prince Duan. Who can say that the Tang family lost the bet?" Tang Ning thought for a while and asked again, "The death of the crown prince by drowning, the death of Prince Su by illness, and the exile of the third prince were also caused by the Tang family and His Majesty?" "I don't know about these." Tang Yu sighed and said, "But your Majesty was the weakest at that time. Even with the Tang family, he could not compete with any of the other three princes. In the end, he was able to sit on the throne. There must be some things that cannot be known by others." Tang Yu looked up at him and said, "These things have long passed. Over the years, no one who wants to bring up the past has a good end. You must not put yourself in danger." Tang Ning nodded and smiled, "Don't worry, I know the limit." When Tang Ning walked out of the yard, some thoughts lingered in his mind. The past of the Tang family and Emperor Chen, the several unsolved cases of the royal family, and the various information revealed in these things made people feel palpitating. However, Tang Ning was not very interested in Emperor Chen's dark history, but his impression of him in his heart deepened again. He stepped out of the yard and saw Zhao Man standing outside the yard, looking at him with tears in her eyes. Tang Ning was startled, walked to her side and asked, "What's wrong?" Zhao Man wiped her eyes, looked up at him, and sobbed, "I'm sorry." Tang Ning was stunned for a moment, and then realized that she must have heard the conversation in the yard just now. He smiled, held her in his arms, stroked her hair, and said, "This is none of your business." Zhao Man looked up at Tang Ning and asked, "Is the father really that terrible?" Tang Ning didn't know how terrible Emperor Chen was, but there was no doubt that he was much more terrible than all of them imagined. A marginalized prince was able to defeat one powerful enemy after another and ascend to the throne. If he was as simple as Zhao Yuan, he would have been swallowed up long ago without leaving any residue. Zhao Man sniffed and asked, if it was the father who had people separate my parents, would you still like me?" Of course. Tang Ning put his arms around her waist and smiled, "You will always be my princess." Fortunate young gentleman. Author, Rong Xiao Rong. Chapter 791. Emperor Chen is the emperor to Tang Ning, but he is a father to Zhao Man. It is indeed a cruel thing to know that her father is a cold-blooded and terrible person. Tang Ning accompanied her for a whole day, and her mood improved a little. In the next 2 days, Tang Ning specially collected some secrets from the previous era. With his current identity and status, it is not difficult to collect these news. After sorting them out, Tang Ning unexpectedly discovered that there were indeed some things he didn't know before Emperor Chen ascended the throne. The court is full of twists and turns. In a year or even half a year, there may be a major reshuffle. A year ago, the Tang family was in its heyday, and Feng Xiang and the Jiangnan party firmly controlled the government. Now, in just 1 year, the Tang family has completely fallen, Feng Xiang has retired and returned to his hometown, and nearly half of the Jiangnan officials have been lost. The court has changed. It was still like this a year ago, and the court more than 20 years ago was very different from today. Even the Tang family was not the top family in Beijing more than 20 years ago. Those powerful and wealthy families were divided among the three princes and fought each other in the court. More than 20 years ago, Emperor Chen, like Zhao Yuan, was just an extremely marginalized prince. In terms of status and power in the eyes of the previous emperor, he was far inferior to Zhao Yuan. Such a lineup, even with the Tang family, would obviously not be taken seriously by the other three princes. Tang Ning could see from some clues that it was probably not just the Tang family that helped Emperor Chen at that time. When he was still a prince, he married Xiaoju's sister, and not long after he ascended the throne, he successively took concubine Zhang Xian, concubine Fang Shu, and concubine Tang Hui into the harem. From the process of Emperor Chen ascending the throne, Tang Ning saw not only the shadow of the Tang family, but also the shadow of the Xiao family, the Zhang family, the Fang family. Tang Ning could finally clear himself of some of his influence on Zhao Yuan. This was not a case of like master, like disciple, but a family gene. 20 years ago, Emperor Chen relied on several fathers-in-law to inherit the throne, and 20 years later, Zhao Yuan finally embarked on a similar path as him. In addition, Tang Ning also discovered some other things. Not long after the Tang family quietly stood in line, the third prince, who was active in the court at the time, was demoted to a commoner and expelled from the capital because of a serious political mistake, and his whereabouts were unknown from then on. In the following year, the powerful and wealthy families in the capital that originally belonged to the other two princes were erased one by one for various reasons, until September of the following year, when the prince accidentally fell into the water and drowned, and the second prince, Prince Su, contracted a serious illness and died suddenly in the mansion in less than half a month. For this Black September, the history books recorded it like this. In the autumn of the 16th year, the crown prince Rui drowned, and the Prince Ji of Su died of an illness. The emperor was very sad and died in Yanghe Hall on the 26th. The crown prince, the Prince of Su, and the previous emperor died one after another. After Emperor Chen succeeded to the throne, after the period of mourning, he married the legitimate daughters of the Tang, Fang, and Zhang families. Among them, concubine Tang Hui was the most favored. Before he ascended the throne, he already had two concubines. One was Xiaoju's sister, the then Princess of Qin, and the other was concubine Yang, the mother of King Hui. Concubine Yang was just a commoner. In order to marry her, Emperor Chen seemed to have a very unhappy relationship with the previous emperor. It can be seen that he still liked concubine Yang very much. However, after ascending the throne, concubine Tang Hui was favored alone, and even the queen had to give her 3 points. When Emperor Chen was still the king of Qin, he had a son with the queen, but he died a year before he ascended the throne. After that, the queen was diagnosed as infertile by the imperial physician. The concubines in the harem tried their best to give birth to a dragon son. Among them, concubine Shu did not fight, and concubine Zhang and concubine Tang Hui fought the most fiercely. However, no one expected that concubine Yang was the first to get pregnant. Later, concubine Yang accidentally miscarried, and concubine Zhang and concubine Tang Hui became pregnant at the same time. After another year, concubine Yang became pregnant again and gave birth to Prince Hui. Then, concubine Yang died of illness, and Prince Hui was adopted by the queen. After the queen died of illness, concubine Zhang, concubine Tang Hui, and concubine Fang Shu were the most noble in the harem, and the balance has continued to this day. There are not many descriptions of the dispute in the harem of Queen Chen in the data. The Tang family, the Fang family, and the Zhang family all helped Emperor Chen and participated in the fight for the throne. After the success, it was normal for them to compete for their own interests. After understanding this history, Tang Ning destroyed the data. There is no doubt that the Tang family contributed the most to Emperor Chen's succession, but this is a different time. Judging from the current situation, Zhao Yuan taking over his position is the best choice for Emperor Chen. In the imperial study room. After reviewing the memorials, Emperor Chen leaned over and slept for a while, but suddenly woke up at a certain moment. Wei Ji unhurriedly stepped forward, took out a handkerchief, wiped the cold sweat on his forehead, and asked with concern, "Your Majesty, are you having a nightmare again?" Emperor Chen leaned back in his chair, his chest heaving, breathing slightly, and calmed down after a while, muttering, "It's been more than 20 years, and they still won't let me go." As he finished speaking, there was a sound at the door of the imperial study, and Zhao Yuan walked in with a soup bowl. Zhao Yuan brought soup to Emperor Chen every day, and read in the palace. Emperor Chen picked up the spoon, drank a mouthful of soup, looked at him, and asked, "Is Zizi Tongji difficult?" Zhao Yuan nodded and said, "It is a little difficult, but Yuaner will work hard." After he finished speaking, he looked at Emperor Chen and said, "Mother said that father often had nightmares these days. I put some polygala in the hall. The imperial physician said that it has a calming effect. Father will not have nightmares after drinking the soup. For more than 20 years, he has often had this nightmare. He has tried all kinds of methods but nothing worked. How could a mere polygala work?" Emperor Chen still smiled and asked, "Yuaner has been out of the palace less these days, and you haven't seen the little girls from the Zhang family, the Wang family, and the Bai family, right?" Zhao Yuan sighed leisurely and said, "Studying is important." A smile appeared on Chen Wang's face and he said, "These 3 little girls are all good. After 2 years, my father will decree that they all marry you, okay?" Bada. The spoon in Zhao Yuan's hand fell into the bowl. He raised his head and hesitated, Is it okay?" Chen Huang patted him on the shoulder and said, "As long as you want, there's nothing you can't do." Emperor Chen felt that Zhao Yuan was working hard at studying, so he specifically asked him to take 1 day off every 3 days. After Zhao Yuan left the palace, he stayed in the Tang family for a while, and he didn't know whether to go to the Wang family, the Zhang family, or the Bai family. There was also a eunuch in the palace who came out of the palace with him. The imperial court formulated a preliminary method to streamline the tax system. Emperor Chen asked him and King Huai to take another look and finalize the matter as soon as possible. Tang Ning browsed through it. She originally wanted to go to Prince Huai's mansion and discuss several places with Prince Huai. When she was about to leave the mansion, she suddenly thought of something. She walked back and asked Xiu'er, "What day is today?" Xiu'er thought for a while and said, "The 6th day of the lunar month. It's the 6th day of November." Tang Ning murmured, shook her head, turned around and walked back. "You can find King Huai anytime, but not today. He saw from the information 2 days ago that today is the death anniversary of concubine Yang. The capital, outside the city. Every emperor in the past dynasties would choose a geomantic treasure place for himself as an imperial mausoleum. The imperial mausoleum of the contemporary Emperor Chen was selected 20 years ago. The late empress and concubine Yang were buried here. Nanshan, among the imperial mausoleums, in front of a certain mausoleum. King Huai carefully cleared away the few weeds next to the tomb, and wiped the stone tablet in front of the tomb spotless. After doing this, he walked to another tomb and did what he had just done again. Then, he stood quietly next to the tomb. After an unknown amount of time, a middle-aged man came from behind, put down the food box in his hand, and placed several plates of pastries on the stone steps. He stood in front of the mausoleum, touched his slightly plump belly, and said with a smile, "These are the foods she used to like." It has been more than 20 years, and I don't know if her taste has changed. King Huai looked forward and said, it has been more than 20 years. The middle-aged man said, 22 years. It's been 22 years. King Huai looked back, smiled somewhat self-deprecatingly, and said, in 22 years, all the people who didn't deserve to die have died, and the people who deserve to die are still living well in this world. This is a what kind of world is this?